I'm sure our participants and our sisters and brothers who are watching us would like to join me in thanking Father Timothy for the profound presentation, sharing personal experience, wisdom, theological and biblical insights. Among many important aspects of sustaining hope, I would highlight only two: encounter of differences which create sustaining hope is a sound theological foundation. The opportunity for guests to study and to share skills and gifts are practical signs of hope. Encounter of differences is the key to release love, grace, and creative energy. Encounters are between the divine and the human, between woman and man, between people of different religious ethnicity, nationality, cultures, or political views. We are impoverished without encounters. Something new is created, including the birth of a child by encounter. Our physical and mental barriers and our fears dissolve as we find out that the stranger is our neighbor, our sister, brother, or fellow human being who has similar needs, fears, and gifts as we do. Encounter bestows blessing upon both host and guest on whichever side of the border we find ourselves. Richard Rohr, a Franciscan, speaks about on the edge of the inside, a tent of meeting outside the camp. But the outside tents are fewer and less desirable because they are risky. Center of the camp is safe, untouched by the other. Walter Brueggemann describes it as totalism of the system that wants to silence, banish, or eliminate every prophetic intrusion. So the meeting point has to be outside the camp where the people can think the unthinkable and imagine the unimaginable. Asylum seekers who risk their lives to come to our shores are already winners, but they lose hope and courage due to British bureaucracy, being treated as a case number, the talents and skills laid waste, and the time dislocated. We do need some light in our nation. How can you invite a guest to your home when you have no home? You go through the same bureaucratic hurdles for social benefits, and you are known by a referral number. Further, may I add, deep-seated racism in our society. The generations of Black and minority ethnic people are not just marginalized, but they don't feel a belonging to this nation in which they were born. Ironically, the marginalized at home and the asylum seekers identify with one another in many ways. They generate sustaining hope and have immense potential to contribute to wider society. Father Timothy, your biblical insights point to practical actions, seeking an opportunity to the guests to study and to share gifts and skills for the greater good is definitely a sign of hope. You call for a small effort by many. Once put into the hands of the Lord of harvest, these will bear fruits beyond our imagination. And may I add, the season of Lent surely reminds us that death and resurrection of our Savior is the final act of life winning over death. So be it. Once again, Father, I thank you. And I now invite our participants, those who are joining us through comments, please put your comments in, and also questions. You got better make a question mark for us to easily identify panelists with us, and I will try to direct these questions to them for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you. I have picked a few questions, and we all can see in comments. I think, Martin, I picked up a question in a Jeremy Harding's writing in 2020, and it's about the richer nations where people think generosity is wise, and how the churches can help change the views. The question probably goes to Father Timothy, if you're happy to make a response, but others are welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think what's transformative for most people is simply experience. If you go abroad and see people whom you've thought of as them, and you sit with them and receive their hospitality, then you no longer see them as them, you see them as part of us. I think the big problem is that we've drawn, as St. Teresa of Calcutta says, we've drawn the circle of the family too tight. Whereas when you're with people, suddenly you don't see them as threats anymore. So I would say get abroad. What was transformative of my life, well, a little bit anyway, is actually just going to visit people in refugee camps in Rwanda, in Burundi, Angola, going to places like AIDS hospitals in Honduras, and not discovering victims, but discovering brothers and sisters. So I don't think you can force people into generosity. You can't morally pressurize them by making them feel guilty. But what you can do, I hope, is a little bit what I've experienced. It's just the experience of being with people. And then you realize that of course you want to share, because you know how much you will receive. And that if you share only a little bit, you will receive vastly more.
Thank you. I got another question. Martin is directing a question to Rinka. What is your reaction to Priti Patel's announcement yesterday? Well, you can choose to answer in full or brief, but others are welcome to speak.
What can I say? I'm afraid I wasn't surprised, because Priti Patel and the previous Home Secretaries have been implementing the hostile environment immigration policy, so this is part of the same parcel. I was not surprised by this insistence on what they call illegal routes, because that's been in practice now for many years. That is how I was refused asylum in 1994. So there are always these attempts to criminalize ways in, or to find faults with what people are doing. But actually there is the Article 31 of the Geneva Convention, the Refugee Convention from 1951, stipulates that people have to leave through unusual routes, that we cannot apply for passports, we're running away from dangers, and we have to find ways to survive, and we will. And I think we also need to be reminded that the reason why people are forced into hands of traffickers is because there are no any other routes. We have registered at community sponsors 3 years ago, but we were able to resettle only one family, because that is a very complicated, time-consuming and resource-consuming process. So it is the governments, Western governments, who have created a situation which forces people into these, unsafe situations, and the government is going to try to make these routes more punishable for those who are using people and charging them. But it is not, I'm afraid, it's not a solution for the problem that we're facing, which is global. At the moment, there are 26 million refugees in the world. And then the amount of money that's being spent, our money that's being spent on enforcement, I was just reading the latest statistics. 4.3 million pounds was spent just between October and December on removing 322 people. That is £13,500 per person to chart a private flight. Now, I'm sure we would find better ways of using those resources, but somehow enforcement and hostility is a priority. So I think we all have a role to play, and this new proposal is open for consultation. I have registered on the platform today to give my views. And as I was registering, there were 2,800 other people on the same platform. So we all have a voice, and we all have a role to play, whether you choose to write to your MP or support people publicly or on social media or directly. And I think one of the challenges for us is that these negative narratives are out there. But I'm actually very optimistic because I tend to meet lots of people like you who do good work. And here we are today celebrating that good work. But normally, good people, especially in faith communities who are on the grassroots in their communities, and we've seen that with mutual aid groups, good people tend to do good work quietly. And so we get this skewed picture out there that everybody is of the same negative opinion about refugees and migrants. But that is not true. There are many, many people out there who are very understanding, very compassionate, very supportive. It's just that they don't really get to have a say and will not fight for those spaces to be shouting about it because it is seen as not something that people do. So people tend to be modest about their good work.
Thank you, Rinka. Another question, quite interesting, is why is tough on refugees seen as a vote winner or at best neutral? Is it true? And if so, how can we combat it? I wonder whether Chris would like to take this question.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's because there is an unfortunate trait in human nature, and our faith tells us this, that there is a bias, a shadow in all of us, which if appealed to, we find it difficult sometimes not to respond. And I think this is why I think actually that having some deep fundamental faith that is deeper than ideology in who we are and what makes us tick, where we've come from and why we're here is fundamental. And we've seen that time and again, if you appeal to the worst of human nature, it sort of itches away under our skin, and it appeals to all that's worst in us, into a kind of, we get fearful, an isolationism, you start telling the narratives of racialism and eugenics, and for some reason, well, we would say it's because basically going right back to the fall, all of us have, unless we have some deep reason for resisting it, we find it compellingly attractive, even though it's terrible. And I think that what Christianity and the other great faiths provide is a deep meta narrative that we are all one race. We are all equally dignified before God. We are all loved by him. And that we are all, in the end, our brothers and our sisters' keeper. And I think this is why it's absolutely vital that we keep alive these deep narratives Because when they're told, when these stories are told, when we appeal to what's best in people, then that flame lights up and they hear it. But if we allow just one final thing, I do want to say this, that we must not underestimate the extent to which these deep negative narratives run. They were running throughout the 20th century in the eugenicists and the racialists, and people at top scientific academies were talking about the degeneration of their race if we allowed migrants to come in. And Marie Le Pen kept on her desk a novel which was depicting terribly a totally false picture of the vice that she saw immigrants would bring into France and elsewhere. And some of, for instance, of Donald Trump's top advisors, when the Syrians refugees fled from Syria and wanted to go to America, he said, this is an example precisely of what that book was talking about. So we must not underestimate the way these narratives reach into the very depths of our government, and they need to be resisted with the deep narratives that we tell from our faith communities about goodness, love, brotherhood, sisterhood, and the need to love our neighbor as ourselves, because we're all of equal dignity in God's sight.
Thank you, Chris.
I just add something, Andrew.
Sure.
And I think that in every society, you find fear. Every society has undercurrents of fear. And in some ways, the more unequal a society gets, the less security people have about the future, the more they're likely to be motivated, touched by fear. And of course, this is particularly the case at the moment with the pandemic, where everybody's future is so unsure. And one way that you cope with fear is by projecting that fear on someone or some group of people. You say, that's what I'm afraid of. If we get rid of them, it will all be all right. This is what the French philosopher René Girard calls the scapegoat mechanism. Find a scapegoat, cast them out, and it will all be well. And so much of our politics is a politics of fear. It stirs up fear, provokes fear. And that means that scapegoats are sought. But of course, once they get rid of them, you have to find another one, because the profound causes of fear still remain. And because we know, as the gospel says, the opposite of fear is love.
Thank you, Timothy. We got just about three minutes left. I just raised the last question. We are all strangers on earth. What can we do to encourage our politicians and neighbors without faith? Understand this. People of faith and those who are people of no faith, there's a confusion how we see them. But I think the question is simpler, that how can we encourage them? Who wants to take it?
Drinker, I wonder if you want to have a go at this.
So in our work, we work very, very in our communities in deep roots. We don't say grassroots, we say deep roots. And it always starts with conversation. And it always is about building trust and not judging people, but sharing our experiences and our stories. And that's how we make sense of the world. And building up from that local level to regional, to national, joining it up together, and very importantly, connecting individual struggles into bigger causes and addressing systemic problems, which can be scary. But we will not change the situation that we're in if we just keep rescuing babies out of the water. We need to go up the stream and see who's throwing babies into the water and stop that. So that's what we're doing. We spent 2 years listening to what migrants and refugees who are not one unified group want together. And we pulled it together in what we call Fair Immigration Reform Movement Charter, and following tradition from the Chartist movement. And we're now asking people to sign up to that as a set of values, set of principles based on justice, dignity, action, and welcome. And then we're going to plan to work together. So it is for us and allies, not yet for politicians, but it describes not only what is wrong with the system, but what we can do to fix it. So if we can imagine a better system, fairer system, then what can be conceived can be delivered, to stay in the theme of today. And I'm absolutely convinced and energized that we can do that, because everything around us is man-made. So we also have to remember that we can remake it and we can make it better. So none of this is, obviously pandemic is slightly out of our control, but many other things in our society, including immigration system and how we treat people, is not, and we can change that. So, and here we are talking about how we can change that and how we can imagine it. I will be seeing you soon again to conspire to change this and to have these conversations, because you are actually the people who have the power. Immigrants cannot vote, but most of you can. And that is your magic power that you have and, will exercise hopefully for the better.
If I could just come in.
I thank the participants. I'll come back to you. We are just about to finish. The time is over. I want to thank participants for raising good questions and the panel for making contribution. Last thing, Chris, and then Chris takes over from here.
Thank you so much. Andrew, can you leave others on the screen? I find it easier to talk to them. I just wanted to add, or talk with them. I also wanted to add that so much of it is built on falsehood. The facts are that we are all migrants, just as we're all strangers. As Timothy said, we are all descended from migrants. I am. My mother came across from Canada, was then abandoned at the age of 7. And migration and movement is at the heart of creation. That the animals do it, the species do it. Trees are climbing their way up the Himalayas. But butterflies are moving across the world, trying to find better places to live as the climate changes. And time and again, and it's just not true that, for instance, when different species arrive in a new place, that they dominate or damage it. It's just the opposite is true. So often the plants and animals, they create flourishing. And we have to keep getting the facts about human movement, about being of one race, about all originating and all being related. There's no such thing as different races. Those are the facts. And secondly, that's the broad thing. I'd recommend one particular book by Sonia Shah called The Next Great Migration, and also a book called Bloody Foreigners, which reveals the absolute sheer extent of the massive contribution to all the things that we think are British have been made by people who've come to us from overseas. So that's absolutely vital. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum is the sheer compassion and love. We have to be open, and we have to find words and narratives that open people's hearts and convert them, not to Christianity or Islam or Judaism, but give them hearts of flesh. So suddenly they are moved with compassion for their brothers and sisters whom they encounter. So the method, the macro and the micro, vital.